everyone, and welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, my name is Elizabeth and I run the blog lifefromtheviolasection.com, where I share my favorite practice tips, general advice, and tech for musicians. Today I have a viola video for you. So I'm going to share the 4 different shoulder rests that I've tried for my viola and just my thoughts on them. Shoulder rests are a really personal thing because we all have different bodies and different proportions between all of our different body parts and how we hold the viola. So these are very personal thoughts, but it might help just to see what different options are out there. If you're a beginner violist, I highly recommend starting with a shoulder rest. Playing without a shoulder rest is a bit uncomfortable because the wood of the instrument is just kind of touching your collarbone and it's really easy for it to slide around. I also just don't quite understand how professionals play without a shoulder rest because shifting is so difficult. So those are my thoughts on not using a shoulder rest. If you're a beginner, I highly recommend just starting with a shoulder rest. So my favorite shoulder rest for the viola is the Everest. Mine's a little bit modified, but it has these great rubber feet on it, and it's really, really sturdy. So at one point, this just wasn't quite high enough for me, so I got a piece of foam like this, and I just rubber banded it on, and then sewed this black fabric over it so that it matched and was all black, looked normal in concerts. So all of the feet, everything that touches the instrument is rubber, so if it falls off, it never really harms the instrument like some other shoulder rests do that I'll be showing you later. But I just love how it looks and it feels great too. So here's how it looks on me. It fits really, really well between my shoulder and my chest. And I can easily just hold the viola without my hand and just talk as I need to, or turn a page, do whatever I need to, and it just stays in place. So this is the Everest. Definitely my favorite. So the first shoulder rest that I tried for the viola is the Kuhn shoulder rest. This is a very famous shoulder rest. I think it's usually the most popular, or at least the most recommended on string websites. So a lot of people use this one. This uses much firmer rubber and it falls off of my instrument all the time. And it's just gotten a small scratch on my viola from just times where it's just kind of collapsed into the instrument, and it's scary. It is fairly comfortable, but sometimes the foam kind of comes away from this plastic part and it's pretty, not sharp, but it's an edge and it's not very comfortable. So here it is on my viola. Let's see if I can put it on like this. Okay. It's very tightly on there, but all the time when I play, it just kind of comes off. It's always in the middle of an orchestra rehearsal at a quiet moment, and it's this loud boom, and everyone thinks my instrument broke, and it's so embarrassing. It is pretty comfortable, but I feel like my shoulder does come up a little more like this because it's not quite tall enough for me. With basically any shoulder rest for violin or viola, you can rotate the feet. The Everest does this as well to make it either shorter or taller for whatever your body needs. So here I'm making it longer. Let's try it like this. Okay, this is actually a little bit more comfortable, and here it is on my shoulder. I do have the collapsible model, which I think is easier to store in a case. The feet just come down, but it's not quite as sturdy as the original, and it has lots of just sharp plastic edges. So this is just a fine option if it works for you, but I've had a lot of problems with Kuhn shoulder rest over the years. Next up, we have the Bon Musica shoulder rest. This is for a 16-inch viola, and it's very bendable and malleable. So a lot of people choose this one because it can be very ergonomic. I experimented with it for a couple hours one time and I couldn't really find anything that worked, and I tested it out a couple times, but all of these thick metal pieces and all of these just metal nuts and bolts just kind of worried me. It just worried me to have those around my viola, especially if it falls off. What if one of these little rubber case things on the feet falls off? I would just be really worried that something would scratch my viola. So this one goes on a little lower than most shoulder rests do. Most of them kind of go across the widest part, just straight across. This one goes really along the bottom. A lot different from anything else you see. So, like I said, you can bend all of the parts of this, but there's really this part that goes past your shoulder. It's really helpful if you play for long periods of time in an orchestra or for an opera and you have problems holding your viola up. It kind of just does a lot of the work for you. But I feel like it's just not quite right for me. And personally, I just feel like this metal piece right here kind of digs into my chest, and there's not rubber on there, so it would maybe need to be modified if I wanted to really use this. Also, just all these pieces sticking out, it seems so mechanical, and the viola is so delicate. It just kind of worries me. Also, I lost one of these caps like an hour into trying it a couple of years ago. Very industrial, but also very cool. And the final shoulder rest that I've tried and really played with is the Polypad. They make this for all size violins and most size violas, I believe. These are really great for kids before they get comfortable with a regular shoulder rest because a sponge is much comfier and really conforms to your body. So I highly recommend these for students. This is just a big chonker though. It's just really, really large. So it really, really raises the viola up. So to keep this on the viola, I use a little bit of like a carpet gripper, you know, the thing you put underneath the carpet, sit it there, and then we need this little rubber band contraption to keep it connected to the viola. So I highly recommend, if you're gonna have one of these, or if your students have these, to buy a big bag of rubber bands. I got some from Staples, and make a bunch of these, just keep them on hand because they are bound to break. I always kept a couple extras in my case when I used the Polypad. And here's how I put mine on my viola. You can always set the angles a little bit differently. You can always sit it in a slightly different spot, but I think this is what works best for me. So it's held on by the rubber bands, and that carpet gripper is underneath so that it stays a little bit better in place, because without that, it just slides around and it was almost impossible to play with it. So here's what it looks like on. Just kind of the angles. It feels great like this, but then when I take my arm away, I feel like it's just sliding against my shirt. So it's a little more difficult. I just don't like it quite as much as the Everest. Also, with a sponge like this, you can lose a little bit of sound from your instrument because this is directly touching a big portion of the instrument, and it can block out some vibration. So your viola might not be quite as loud as you'd like it. It does feel pretty comfortable though. It kind of feels like my viola is just floating, which is a nice feeling. I feel like I can get it to rest on my collarbone, how I like it to. But again, it doesn't feel super secure, so I would kind of be worried about it. And I feel like right now the Everest is just what's working best for me. The Everest grips against my clothes really nicely, and the rubber feet feel secure on my instrument, but not like it'll break or scratch anything. Okay, so let's do a rundown of what I think each of these 4 shoulder rests are good for. I would recommend the Polypad for complete beginners, especially young children who are not used to holding an instrument or using a shoulder rest yet, because it's just going to be the most comfortable option. When I started out, I had like a little pillow, that's what we called it. It was just like a piece of foam wrapped in velvet, and it had rubber bands on it, and it was so comfortable. And then after a couple of years, I had to get a shoulder rest, and it wasn't quite as comfortable, but then, you know, it was like a big step in learning the violin and then the viola once I got there. So I highly recommend some kind of foam option for young beginner students. Next is the Kuhn shoulder rest. I think this is good for just a step up for beginners after the foam. You know, it's just a fine basic shoulder rest. Kuhn does make a lot of different options. There's definitely more options for violinists than violists, as with any kind of string instrument accessory, there's always the most available for violin and cello, and then viola, and then bass. Not my choice, not my choice. I'm just saying what options are available. So the Kuhn is just like your standard shoulder rest. It's just a good first one to try out because it's like the standard. Next, I recommend the Bon Musica shoulder rest for someone who's looking for something adjustable and more ergonomic, especially if you have trouble holding the viola up, which is a very common problem because the viola is so heavy. This shoulder rest is somewhat heavy. This, I realize, is not actually metal. It's really like plastic, but all of the other pieces are made out of metal, so that does make it kind of heavy, but it's a great option because it goes past your shoulder and can help hold the viola up, especially if you're playing really long gigs or you're playing in operas, something like that. This can be a really great option. And I think when I did play in an orchestra in college, I used this one just for those opera performances because it helped me keep the viola up on my shoulder for a long period of time. And then finally, I just think the best option all around is the Everest. It really, I think it has a sleek design. Just my opinion, but I love the rubber feet. They always feel so protective, and I've been using this I bought it in high school, so about 10 years ago is when I bought this. It's still holding up really well. But this has been like my main shoulder rest that I've always come back to for the past 10 years. So I highly recommend it. It hardly ever falls off my viola. You can adjust the feet higher or lower as you need to. And there are a couple holes right here and down here to make it larger or smaller depending on the size of your viola. This is pretty light. It's made of all plastic. The only metal are these little feet adjusters, and they don't do much, like they don't weigh much. And just like I customized this one, anything can be made with some extra foam, just rubber banded on top. You can always adjust these higher, not really lower, except with the feet, but you can always make them a little bit different, a little more cushioned, depending on your needs. It's a great thing to experiment with, especially to feel more comfortable when you play and to have just a better overall playing experience. So that's a bunch of the shoulder rests that I've tried for viola. If you've tried some other ones, especially the very fancy $400 one, let me know down in the comments. I've kind of wanted to get it, but it's just so expensive. It's like, do I really need that when the Everest works just fine? But if you've tried any other shoulder rests that you've really loved, please let me know down in the comments, because I always like experimenting with the viola. If this video was helpful for you, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel. I post new musical videos every Sunday at noon Eastern Time. Thanks for watching.